Are we ready? Where'd Betsy go? Is he back? Okay. All right. Okay. Good morning again, everybody. I am Gloria Walker. I am board president of NAMI, Ohio, and proud to be so. I want to welcome you to NAMI, Ohio's annual conference. We're excited about our theme this year, the great mental health debate, and acknowledging the elephant in the room. Before we get started, though, I want to say we have a very special guest in the audience today. I'd like to recognize Ohio Supreme Court Justice Evelyn Lundberg Stratton. Justice Stratton is a longtime mental health advocate. For those of us who've been kicking around for quite a few years, we know everything that she has done for us. Justice Stratton, on behalf of all of the citizens of the state of Ohio dealing every day with mental illness, we want to express our heartfelt appreciation. Without your bully pulpit, many of our loved ones would be in harm's way. You're very special to NAMI, Ohio. Thank you. Before I introduce our keynote speaker, Congressman Patrick Kennedy, I have a few general announcements that I must make. Registration and general information is located at the west end of the Regency foyer area. Staff will be available today until 7:30 and then 7 a.m. tomorrow until 1 p.m. Staff have identifying ribbons and they'll be happy to help you. Your conference program has complete information about the agenda and the Saturday workshops. Please take time to read the workshop descriptions and the board member candidate statements. Current NAMI Ohio board members and board member candidates have identifying ribbons, and we encourage you to meet and to talk with them. Board member candidates will be available during today's break from 11:15 to 11:45 at the NAMI Ohio's table in the exhibit area. Voting will take place tomorrow at lunch. If you would like continuing education credit for today, please make sure that you have signed in on the attendance sheet at the registration information desk outside. You must complete the program evaluation found in your conference packet and return it to the information desk at the end of today to receive your certificate for all those attendees. For all of you, we value your feedback. Please complete the evaluation found in your conference packet and return it to the information desk. General certificates of attendance are available if you need one. A designated smoking area may be found on the north side of the hotel by Einstein's Bagels. As a member of the Ohio Legal Rights Services PAMI Council, I want to encourage everyone to stop by their table during the break and pick up a brochure about the council. PAMI stands for Protection and Advocacy for Individuals with Mental Illness, and it works to ensure that the rights of individuals with mental illnesses are protected. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, the Honorable Patrick J. Kennedy. Former Congressman Patrick J. Kennedy served for 16 years in the United States House of Representatives, representing Rhode Island's 1st Congressional District. He distinguished himself as a leader in Congress on issues of health care, science, veterans, technology, civil rights, and mental health. Throughout his career, Congressman Kennedy has been a vocal advocate for health care reform. He was the author and chief House sponsor of the Wellstone-Domenici Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act of 2008, an act that has expanded access to mental health services to over 100 million Americans. He also authorized and co-sponsored dozens of bills to increase the understanding and treatment of neurological and psychiatric disorders. As a member of the Military, Construction, and Veterans Affairs Appropriations Subcommittee, Congressman Kennedy led the fight for funding increases for veterans' health care, including provisions in the Health Care Improvement Act to enhance the quality and availability of services for soldiers and veterans with traumatic brain injury and post-traumatic stress disorder. Since leaving office in January 2011, Congressman Kennedy has been devoting his efforts to promote research into neuroscience, including illnesses like depression, addiction, and post-traumatic stress disorder. A member of the Kennedy family, he is a son of the late U.S. Senator Edward M. Kennedy from Massachusetts. He graduated from Phillips Academy in Andover, Massachusetts in 1986 and from Providence College in Rhode Island in 1991. He and his wife Amy reside in Providence, Rhode Island, and they are new parents, just having given birth to a beautiful and healthy baby boy this week, Owen Patrick Kennedy. It is now my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, the Honorable Patrick J. Kennedy.
Thanks, Gloria.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Let's hear it for Gloria. All the board of directors of NAMI. And how's Terry doing? How's that guy, Terry? Is he really fighting your fight or what? Doing your good? Well, I'm pleased to see this full room at this hour of the day. I haven't been in a room with this many people at one time since I was last over at my Aunt Ethel's house. I am very blessed. I come from a big family, and I'm doing my part to add to its size. I just got a Buckeye onesie, and I'm going to bring that home to the little baby, but I don't know what you're doing because he might do a twosie in his onesie. I usually get up every 2.5 hours to bring him to my wife because she does the real work. And boy, what a miracle this whole process is. And I was fortunate to be there with her and watch him come out, and his arms and legs were flailing, and he was screaming, and I couldn't have been happier. It was a scary process because I'll tell you, they just scare the living daylights out of parents. Those doctors do sometimes. We went in and we were screened for a developmental disability, and we screened positive. And our first obstetrician said, well, you might want to come back in 2 weeks and get an amnio test. And I said, why would we want to do that? Well, to see if there's confirmation of the disability. And I said, well, we don't need to know. We're having the baby. And he said, well, just in case you choose to, because if you choose to terminate, you only have 3 weeks to do it. And I said to the doctor, you have got to be kidding me. Do you not know who my Aunt Eunice Kennedy Shriver was? Do you not know that if we do have a challenged child, that child is going to be born into a world that's a whole lot different because of everybody in this room, and for people like my Aunt Eunice, who started the Special Olympics and made having every single person in our country somebody that's worthy of to be valued and not to be condemned because of their physical challenges. And that was the last that we had that doctor. I got a new doctor after that, by the way. So we have a lot of work. NAMI, you do great work. You do great work. And that notion of teaching providers to be, treat the whole person, what a revolutionary concept that is. I can recall going into Mayo Clinic when I was just after my arrest for driving under the influence. And I went into the main hospital, and the physician there was doing my intake and talking to me. And he asked me about how I was doing in my life, what gave meaning to my life, what was important to me, how I saw my future. And I thought to myself, wait a second, I'm not over in the psychiatrist's, wing of the hospital. What's this general practitioner doing asking me about my spiritual life? What's he doing asking about my emotional life? I'm in the emergency room. But isn't that the case in our medical system? That we treat everything but the emotional and spiritual life. We treat all the symptoms of untreated mental illness. When Jim Ramstad and myself went around the country to pass mental health parity, we would have a few people who would come. And I see you have your Supreme Court Justice here, a great advocate on your behalf. We would ask our local law enforcement, our police chief, and our emergency room physicians to show up. And you know what they came to testify? They came to testify that the ERs, the emergency rooms, are really addressing a lot of mental health issues. In fact, the doctors told me that over half of my cases are mental health cases. But I don't get reimbursed for them. So what I do is I write up the case as a contusion. That's a bruise. After someone has some kind of self-inflicted injury or self-destructive behavior. I write up my cases as lacerations, and I get reimbursed for sutures. Those are stitches. These are the things that I write up, because if I were ever to write up the root cause of what's bringing people into the emergency room, I would probably get the case denied by insurance companies. And I had the Surgeon General at the time, Richard Carmona, said, I came back from Vietnam, he said, and I became an emergency room physician. I could save your life if your heart had stopped or your lungs had collapsed. But I couldn't repair you if you came in with a broken mind and emotional challenges, because those are beyond my ability to know how to deal with. We build cancer hospitals, we build heart hospitals, we talk about diabetes, we talk about all of these issues, when in fact it all comes back, in most cases, to an untreated mental health issue. So why don't we talk about the real issue? Why don't we talk about the elephant in the room? Well, like most elephants in our rooms, we don't talk about them because it's what we want to avoid talking about because of something called stigma. And we discriminate against people who suffer from these illnesses because we perceive these illnesses as moral defects of character, not medical issues to be treated. Now, it's interesting because Gloria was mentioning how I was the sponsor of the Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act. And I can tell you when I first got elected to the State House, I was 21 years old. I was the youngest member of the State House. Then I got elected to the United States Congress at 27, and I was the youngest member of Congress. Then I got elected to the Democratic leadership at 31. And I know that none of it had to do with my last name being Kennedy whatsoever. It was all that good looks and personality. So you can imagine how honored I felt to carry a piece of legislation in the tradition of my family. And the only reason I got to be the sponsor of this great law called the Pete Domenici Paul Wellstone Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act is because no one else wanted to sponsor it. Just keep in mind the way legislation gets sponsored in this country is if it's a popular piece of legislation, it goes to the most senior member of the Committee of Jurisdiction. That's why Ted Kennedy is the sponsor of so many big pieces of legislation, my dad, because he was the most senior member of the Health Committee. So I come to Washington from the smallest state in the country, Rhode Island, in the minority party. I'm 27 years old and the youngest member of Congress, but I got to put my name first on the Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act. Why? Because of stigma and the fact that most of my colleagues weren't running all over themselves to put their name down on a bill that was called mental health. Now I fast forward you to when I went to treatment. I got arrested and was sent into treatment 4 years before I ended up floor managing the mental health parity bill. I was called on to resign Congress, to leave, and you know what happened to me when I got back from treatment? All my staff said, "Don't talk about it. It's the elephant in the room." And everywhere I went, I tried not to talk about it because I even felt ashamed of my behavior, but everybody else wanted to talk about it. And all of a sudden, I found myself talking about it all the time. I found senior citizens in my elderly high-rises come up to me after I spoke, and they said, "Patrick, can I talk to you for a minute over here where no one will listen?" I said, "Sure." "Well, Patrick, you know, last year my husband died, and I was in a depression, and I didn't know it at the time, but my son knew it, and he took me to a mental health hospital." And I said, "Good, I'm glad you got the treatment." She said, well, and then she looked around like this, "They put me on Prozac." And I said, "Yeah, great, you know, you're getting some help." She said, "Besides my son, you're the only one who knows that." And I said, "Well," she said, "you know, if anyone else in this place knew that I was on Prozac, they'd think I was crazy." I kid you, you not. This is what one of my constituents told me. She said, "You keep up that work for mental health, and you'll have my vote next time." Do you know, in the following election, following my arrest and my call for resignation, I ended up winning with the biggest plurality of all my 8 terms in office. And you know, today, Rhode Island has the largest incident rate of mental illness in the country. And I tried to figure that out. Why could Rhode Island have? Well, maybe it's because people are less stigmatized And so they now fill out the forms that they feel that they need to be treated for mental illness. So because of lack of stigma, Rhode Island, according to the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, has the #1 rate of mental illness in the country. And the director of mental health said to me, you know, Congressman, it's because there isn't as much stigma in Rhode Island and people don't have a fear of getting treated for the illnesses they need treatment for. So while I was in treatment, I got a lot of cards from my colleagues in Congress saying, get well, hope you make it back, stay strong. So when I got back to Congress, I went around and I visited many of them to thank them personally for their encouragement. And invariably they told their staff, because as members of Congress we can't go anywhere without staff. They would tell their staff, leave the room, I want to talk to the congressman personally. So I would sit there, and I had Republicans and Democrats tell me stories about their lives and their families' lives that would raise the hair on the back of your neck. So I knew who these people were now in a way that I didn't know them before, because they shared with me what they felt comfortable talking to me about, because now they knew I understood. And you would be surprised, because when the bill for mental health parity came to the floor of the United States Congress, many of those same people voted against mental health parity. And I went up to them afterwards and I said, you're entitled to vote however you want, but I thought we had a really good conversation, and I'm surprised that you voted the way you did. And they said, Patrick, do you know what would happen to my wife, to my child, to me, if anybody knew that the reason I was voting for parity was because my child had a mental illness? Do you know what kind of humiliation that would be for my wife, for my family, if they were to know that my daughter has been hospitalized several times for an eating disorder? Do you know that they would blame me as a congressman for not spending enough time with my family? And frankly, Patrick, I don't think I spent enough time with them. He said, Patrick, I come from a different part of the country than you do. I come from a part of the country where we can't talk about these things. And I thought to myself, the job that we have is much bigger than just passing a piece of legislation. Just like 40 years ago, the job of passing civil rights was much more than voting rights, much more than fair housing, much more than civil rights. Before we could pass those bills, and even afterwards, we required a fundamental change of heart. And no law is going to write out of the hearts of people who feel fear, prejudice, and stigma. No law banning discrimination is going to write that stigma out of people's hearts. So the job that you and I have today ultimately is an inside job. It's a personal job. The civil rights movement was born out of the churches because people felt that we were all God's children. And my uncle, President Kennedy, I'm proud to say, was the first president of the United States ever to address the nation in a nationally televised address on the moral issue of civil rights. And in that speech he said, who amongst us would trade the color of their skin and be content with those who counsel patience and delay. My friends, you all have family members. You have all experienced it yourselves in your own lives. You know what discrimination is like. Some of you know about what it's like to be discriminated because of the color of your skin. Some of you know how it's like to be discriminated because of your gender. But today we know what it's like to be discriminated against because of an immutable part of your biology that makes you have an illness in your brain as opposed to anywhere else in your body. And just like all those other false ways that we prejudice people because we don't know enough. We're ignorant, and that fuels fear and bigotry and prejudice. So ultimately, the question that we have to ask ourselves is whether we ourselves are going to allow our brothers and sisters, our mothers and fathers, our children to be treated in a way that we ourselves would not tolerate. Because this fight for parity, this fight for freedom from discrimination and stigma and mental illness is a much deeper fight. It's a fight for civil rights and human rights. And 2 years ago at my dad's funeral, on his mass card was Matthew 25. And in that passage in the Bible that talks about salvation, it says, those that are there for the least one of these, my brothers and sisters, was there for me. It's the only part of the Bible that talks about salvation. And the way to salvation is to treat everybody as you yourself would want to be treated, and no differently. And to treat everybody as a child of God. And ultimately, if we understand what we're after is protecting human dignity, protecting God's children, protecting our family members, then we're going to be fortified. Because I know you've got a tough job out there. Not only are you trying to provide needed medical care, but you're trying to provide it in an environment that is very hostile to the very work that you do. But I'm here today to tell you that times are going to change. And they're going to change in the next 2 to 3 years because we are going to make them change. Now, when we passed the mental health parity law, there were many in Congress who believed that we ought to just pass it for people with severe mental illness. Biologically based disorders is what they said. And we made the argument, Ramstead and myself, that you're going to leave a whole lot of people who also have brain illnesses. You're going to leave them out. And in a sense, we're going to be dividing up a fight that we all should be united in. And at the end of the day, everybody got on board. From autism to Alzheimer's, from addiction to depression, from schizophrenia to bipolar, everybody may have a different illness and symptoms, but we're all united because the treatment of those illnesses is discriminated against. Whether your child has autism and you can go to the neurologist and get your insurance paid for, but if your child needs speech therapy, if your family needs counseling, then you have to pay a 50% copay, even though that's essential for your child and your family's well-being. This is the nature of segregation in the mental health field. We have segregated people. Now, I recall that my Uncle Robert Kennedy, who is Attorney General of the United States, And he went around the country and he said it didn't matter what state you lived in, you all deserve to be treated as American citizens with civil rights. Because you're an American. You deserve to be treated regardless of the state you come from. But there were places in this country where they had colored water fountains, segregated facilities. And we all know how dehumanizing that is now. But in the mental health field, we often do that to each other. Because who amongst us wants to get treatment and then be told to go drink from the colored water fountain? And frankly, the mental health field has been isolated and segregated from the overall health field. Why can't I go into my regular primary care doctor and get a checkup from the neck up? Why can't my child? Why can't my child, if my child may have autism, I want to catch it early, I want my baby to get a checkup from the neck up. And I want my family members who may be getting older, who may suffer from dementia, but whose treatment could be enhanced if they got early intervention, I want them to get a checkup from the neck up. So if you're a pediatrician and you're not doing a checkup from the neck up, if you're a geriatric clinician and you're not doing a checkup, if you're a primary care doc, an orthopedist, you name it, if you're a physician, a nurse, a medical provider, and you're not doing mental health, you're not practicing overall health, because mental health cannot be separated from overall health. So we need to stop segregating the body. One thing is mental health, one thing is overall health, because it's all connected. But you know, frankly, it wasn't until 2008 that the United States Congress and the President of the United States decided that the brain was part of the body. And frankly, because we haven't gotten final regulations on parity yet, it's really not certain right now whether the brain is part of the body. Because insurance companies can still discriminate against physical illnesses of the brain as if they're not real. But I'm going to tell you today why it's going to all change. It's going to change because our American heroes have come back from fighting for all of us. And they come back with a signature wound of the war, traumatic brain injury and post-traumatic stress. And the symptoms of traumatic brain injury and the symptoms of post-traumatic stress run the gamut of every one of the illnesses that your family members suffer from. So I have a proposal to make for you today. If we make our veterans the heroes that they are, and we vow not to leave them behind on the battlefield when they come home, if we vow not to say the war is over just because they come home, if we make it our priority to do for them what they've done for us, and that's treat them with dignity and respect and to protect them the way they protected us, I am here to tell you, our veterans' fight is our fight. When the veterans win, we'll win. And the veterans are what's going to unite all of us. Because frankly, in Washington today, everybody's going to members in Congress and saying, don't cut my funding. Don't cut my funding. Well, there's one group that neither Republican or Democrat can vote against. And those are the ones who wore the uniform of our country. And I'm here to tell you that over half of those returning veterans are Guard and Reserve. And what that means is they're not going to often get their health care from the Veterans Administration, especially if you can't see their injury on the outside. So what I'm here to tell you is that implementing mental health parity is for our patriots, because the first time one of the insurance companies denies employer-based sponsored health care to a veteran because they don't know in their insurance plan that it is a veteran, is the day that they're going to read about themselves on the front page of every newspaper in this country. So people say to me, well, this treatment's going to cost money, it's going to, carry costs. I say to my friends, how quickly do you think we'd get after saving them if the Taliban or Al-Qaeda had captured them in Afghanistan or Iraq and held them hostage? All of us would put yellow ribbons around the tree. All of us would demand the president act. All of us would cheer on our special forces as they would rush in and get our soldiers and bring them home. But you know what's happening to our soldiers today? They're being taken prisoner of war. And it isn't by the Taliban. It isn't by Al-Qaeda. The person that's taking more of our soldiers prisoner of war is Uncle Sam. Because what Uncle Sam is doing today is locking up, that's right, locking up our returning veterans at record rates because those veterans aren't getting the needed mental health services to keep them out of jail. And I'm telling you today, it's a disgrace. It's an indictment on our criminal justice system that the best thing we can do to a returning veteran is open up the jailhouse door and say, welcome home. That's not right. So our veterans are medical POWs. They're held hostage by stigma. And the evidence is the overwhelming suicide rates. Imagine a veteran not seeing a way out because they feel so ashamed of the physiological wounds of war that they suffered. And yet we still say those wounds are invisible. We can x-ray the brain. We know these are physical wounds. And we don't even award the Purple Heart to these veterans for the injury that their brains have suffered while serving all of us in the cause of freedom. So my thinking is our neuroscientists, our mental health providers are going to be our 911 force. They're going to be the ones that rush in and kick down the doors of isolation, the doors of violence, the doors of addiction, the doors that are keeping our veterans behind the enemy lines and holding them hostage, far from being freed from the symptoms of the war that they served so honorably to protect us. We owe it to them to go in there with the same urgency that they would go in there for us to keep another attack from happening on our shores. So my friends, they're really going to be the new freedom fighters because they went overseas and kicked down the walls of terrorism. But when they come home today, we got to join them because they're going to kick down the new terrorism. And that's the terrorism of having to confront a mental illness and have insult to injury when we take people hostage by not treating these illnesses as the physical illnesses that they are. So when we set our veterans free, we will set all Americans free who are suffering from these wounds internally. And that is why we need to make them our rallying cry, not only here in Columbus, but in Washington, D.C. as well. So I was leaving Congress, and I left Congress, and no one would return my phone calls anymore. I tried to get someone to answer me, and no one would answer me because I was a former congressman now. But a funny thing happened because the year I left Congress also turned out to be the 50th anniversary of President John F. Kennedy's first year in office. And many people recall that his administration was known as the New Frontier. And I was getting briefings by neuroscientists who told me that the brain was the last medical frontier. So I went to my cousin Caroline, and I said, Caroline, how about we have an event to honor your father's new frontier, and we invite a bunch of neuroscientists, and we try to rebrand, it for today as medical research into neuroscience. And Caroline said, that's a great idea, but we already have the president doing this event for us. We have all the members of Congress joining in. We're already booked up for January 20th. But she said, Patrick, you might want to use the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library for May 25th. And I said, Caroline, you'll have to refresh my memory. What is May 25th? And she said, that's the day that Dad gave his famous moonshot speech. And for an earlier generation, President Kennedy said in 1961 that we would be the first nation on the face of the earth to put a man on the moon and return him safely, as he said, before the decade was out. I have since talked to people like Dan Golden, the longest-serving NASA administrator, and he said, Patrick, I was a young rocket scientist back in 1661, and when your uncle said that we would go to the moon and come back and do it before the decade was out, quite frankly, everybody thought that he had just overdone it. But you know what? History was not on my uncle's side in his life, but history was on his side when it came to the fulfillment of that promise that we would be the first nation to send a man on the moon and return him safely before the decade was out. What we need in this decade is the same aspirational urgency, the same call to action, but it's not to go to outer space. It's to go to inner space. To go to the inner space of neurons, to explore the galaxy of neurons in our brains, to understand how that works. And if we can go to outer space, I bet we can go to inner space as well. And the real irony here is what we needed to construct at NASA in order to manage the effort to go to outer space was something called a supercomputer. That's what NASA came up with, the supercomputer. And guess what's going to allow us in the neuroscience field to make the connections and understand how the targets are to be addressed, what the algorithms are that unite people with schizophrenia, with people with Alzheimer's, with people with other mental health afflictions. It's going to be the supercomputer, because we also have this thing called the genome. And the genome, along with imaging, which is our telescope, is going to be what provides the map of the brain and inner space in a way where we can align where are our best targets for finding better therapies for people with schizophrenia, for better therapies for people with bipolar, for better therapies for people with depression and addiction. But you know what? We've got to do this together, because we need to build this highway together. Dwight Eisenhower built the National Highway System because it was national security. The idea was we all needed to be able to get to where we wanted to go a lot faster. Well, that's the same with all of us in mental health. But the way Washington works, you have Parkinson's Action Network. You have Autism Speaks. You have Alzheimer's Foundation. You have mental health issues like schizophrenia, addiction, bipolar. You have epilepsy. You've got all of them advocating for their own disorder. when in fact studying the same organ of the body is going to be what answers all of our respective challenges. So I said to someone in New Jersey who said that she visits her grandchild in Rhode Island, I said, do you take the back roads? And she goes, no, Congressman, I go on the highway. I said, well, shouldn't we go on a highway of neuroscience? Because my exit for my disorder, my disease, may be down the highway. There may be exits for therapies for Alzheimer's that come up sooner, or maybe they'll come up later. Maybe we'll have autism come up sooner. But all of our exits are on the same highway that we're going to build together, because this thing called the brain cannot be sliced and diced based upon the disorder. We need to understand the way the whole brain works in order to understand how to answer the various therapies that we want for our loved ones. But in Washington, D.C., do you know how many institutes study the brain? 13. 13 separate institutes. What I wonder today is, with modern technology, why can't we start uniting the science in schizophrenia with the science in bipolar, with the science in dementia, and start to figure out how we have more in common than we have that divide us? Because I recall, as sponsor of mental health parity, that we all won only after we worked together. If we were divided, we would have never had mental health parity today. And that law protects everybody, not just people with severe mental illness, but it protects everybody. But like that law, we need a new law in science that unites everybody's research, because the answers for one disorder lie in another. I'll close with this. My aunt, Eunice Kennedy Shriver, we all know her as the founder of Special Olympics. What an amazing organization Special Olympics is. So back in 1961, she called her brother up and she said she wanted an institute at the NIH to focus on developmental disabilities, because my other aunt, my Aunt Rosemary, had a developmental disability. So she wanted to research that, and today it's called the Eunice Kennedy Shriver National Institute on Childhood and Human Development. Now, after she passed away, her late husband, my Uncle Sarge, also passed away. But he passed away from Alzheimer's. How ironic that the most foundational research on dementia and Alzheimer's did not come out of the National Institute on Aging, although you would have thought, because it's an affliction that affects primarily older people, that Alzheimer's research would have come out of the Institute on Aging. No, the most foundational understanding and platform for Alzheimer's research came out of the National Institute on Children. You know why? Because people with Down syndrome and other forms of developmental disability often have higher dementia rates than the average person. So in the course of researching children with Down syndrome, we advanced the research for Alzheimer's. How ironic that Eunice fought for her sister Rosemary, and some of the best beneficiaries of that work are going to accrue to the advantage of her 5 children, who may have been spared a developmental disability, but are facing the prospects of growing older with Alzheimer's because their father died of Alzheimer's. Today, they're going to be closer to the cure because their mother was fighting for her loved one. And at the end of the day, isn't that a lesson to all of us? that if we just do the right thing will come about. Just by fighting for our loved ones, everybody will benefit. So if we fight for the implementation of parity, everyone in this country who gets denied medical care because their illness occurs in the brain as opposed to another part of the body, all of them are going to be benefited. My uncle Robert Kennedy gave a famous speech in Cape Town, South Africa in 1966. I mention it because as I speak here today, my brother Teddy is receiving the highest civilian award from the government of South Africa. He's receiving it from none other than Nelson Mandela. And the award is to my father for standing up against apartheid in the 1980s and overriding the Reagan veto for the Anti-Apartheid Act. And I mention that because he was fighting for the work that his brother had started. And my Uncle Bobby said, each time a person stands up or acts to improve the lot of others, they send forth a tiny ripple of hope. And coming from a million different centers of energy and daring, those ripples can create a current that can knock down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance. In other words, it doesn't take one person to change the world. It takes each of us doing our part to make the world a different place and coming together with all of us doing our part. All over Ohio and all over America, we're all going to achieve the day where our family members, our loved ones, are going to be treated with a bit more respect and dignity because of your work, whether that work is in Columbus or in Washington, D.C. It may be some other family out there in another part of the country who's going to realize the benefit of your work. And ultimately, we're all part of the same human family. And if we treat all of each other as family members, we're all going to live to be living in a world that's a lot better for all of us. Thank you very much and have a great day. Thank you. Thank you, Gloria. Thank you.
Wait a minute.
Yep.
Okay. Do you have time for a couple questions?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Time for about 2 or 3 questions. Let's see who's out here. Betsy, you got a mic? Who's that, Janet? Janet Polster?
Congressman Kennedy, I'm wondering how we can get NAMI members, many of whom are struggling to get access to mental health care for themselves or a loved one, how can they become more engaged in the state's efforts to integrate mental health care with physical health care?
We have a real moment in time. Like I said, if the Supreme Court upholds the health care law, that's an if. But frankly, I can't see where a Supreme Court would deny that 18% of our global economy, our national economy, that's what healthcare is, 18%, that it somehow isn't interstate commerce. I mean, I don't know how the Supreme Court could rule that healthcare is not interstate commerce. And I will tell you why it's so important. Because like national civil rights legislation, we don't want justice to depend on geography. So if you're born in a certain state and that state has minimal benefits, if your child has autism or you have a developmental disability and that state doesn't provide in their Medicaid program for oxygen, speech therapy, wheelchair access, you're being discriminated against because of the state you come from. Just as real as if you were African American in a previous generation when states would openly segregate. And then there were people like John Lewis and others that went around the country to enforce the civil rights law, to push for the fact that we all ought to be treated as Americans no matter what state we came from. That's what's at stake in this health care decision, because at the end of the day, insurance companies are going to try to push you and your family members out because they have businesses to run. And the way they make their money is by not being exposed to risk. And the best way to do that is to limit risk, which means limit care. So if you don't have a national law in place to protect people against discrimination against pre-existing condition, then everybody's at risk, because that could be a race to the bottom. So we have an opportunity, because even if the Supreme Court upholds the health care law, we have another year and a half, 2 years to implement the health care law. And when it ultimately gets implemented, we want to make sure it's comprehensive, that it treats the whole person from head to toe, not just from the neck down. So, but like the civil rights law, it was only worth the paper it was written on. If you didn't have enforcement, it didn't mean anything. And we know we've still got a long ways to go, both on civil rights, and the only way we're going to be able to achieve victory on parity is if we fight for implementation. So the law is there, but what's the difference now? It's got to be implemented, and the only way it can be implemented is if it also has enforcement. So the only way we get that done is if all of you stand up for your family members and loved ones and for yourselves. Because if an insurance commissioner only hears from the providers, they're not going to be motivated in the same way as if they heard from consumers. And the only way insurance companies are going to do the right thing is if we make them do the right thing. And the only way that's going to happen is if we put pressure on them. Because as Frederick Douglass, the great abolitionist, said, power concedes nothing without demand. Never has, and it never will. This is not going to happen because we all of a sudden wake up one day and say, wouldn't it be nice if we all treated each other with dignity and respect? It's going to happen when we make our government respond and when we make our insurance companies and the providers respond. And that's only going to happen if people are willing to stand up. And if we say, like Rosa Parks did, when they said, get to the back of the bus. And she said, no, I'm going to sit right where I am. We have to say, when an insurance company denies treatment, we got to say, no, we deny you, feeling like you can deny us.
Okay, a couple more. I can't really see out there. Who else is out there?
There's
Ron Rett, your question?
Mr. Kennedy, you have a national reputation, and we appreciate your fight for parity and the fight against the stigma. You just gave us one example as pushback against the insurance companies. What else can we do at a local affiliate level that can make an impact and fight the stigma?
Going back to our veterans, over half of them will get their treatment for traumatic brain injury and post-traumatic stress through their private employer. So the key is for us to fight for them, because I can guarantee you it's a lot easier for a major company to deny your family members, because who are they? Addicts, people with schizophrenia, mentally ill. We're not always the most popular bunch, okay? But frankly, when they start denying our American heroes, they're going to have to read about it on the front page of the paper. And when they start doing the right thing because they don't know which one's a veteran and which one isn't, we're all going to benefit. Now, I've talked to Paul Rykoff, who runs the Iraq-Afghan War Veterans of America, and he is putting together an accountability project for the returning veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan. And among the things that he wants to do is even to get states to count in their prison population and in their criminal justice system the veterans. And you know, there are a lot of states that don't do that. You would expect today that I would have the numbers on how many veterans today are in jail in America. We don't have those numbers. Why? Because it's not up to the federal government to count those prisoners, when most of those prisoners are in state and local and county jails. And those jails have no requirement to identify a veteran who's just been arrested. And I am telling you, Rhode Island only passed a law 2 years ago to count veterans coming in. And that's changing everything, because the police in our state, many of whom are veterans themselves, don't like putting handcuffs on their fellow Guard and Reserve members. So we've all been struggling a long time to see our criminal justice system be overturned, because all it is a mental health system of last resort for so many of our loved ones. I believe we have a teachable moment. You know what they say a teachable moment is? When you're coming into the emergency room for the 15th time because of intoxication and you're wondering why it is that you keep needing to come in. Someone says, how much do you drink on a daily basis? And it's like, uh-oh, does that have something to do with that? It's a teachable moment. So we have a teachable moment because, you know, there's very little that's going to pierce Washington or Columbus down the street, right down that state house, unlike the veteran. Because all we do is get lost in the mix of people who are fighting for education, fighting for, you know, the arts, fighting for the environment, wait a second. First and foremost, we got to fight for the people who fought for us, number one. But I'm saying to you is by winning it for them, both in implementation of parity and by winning it for them by doing the neuroscience research that's going to be necessary to help better treat and save people with traumatic brain injury and post-traumatic stress, all of us benefit. That, I think, is the key. And you know what? Our veterans need you, like you're already doing with veterans' families in the Families to Families program. Thankfully, NAMI is already responding. But I'm just telling you, that's what we need to do more of, because they need us. Because you've been in the trenches here at home fighting for the cause that's going to save their lives. So we're in a position now to be there for our veterans, and frankly, they're in a position to be there for all of us. Yes.
Yeah. Hey. Said bully pulpit.
Congressman, if you could just allow me to share with the group what Ohio actually is doing, because
Yes.
I've got a whole audience here that needs to know. Actually, Ohio has really taken this by the horns. I've been working for 3 years. I was part of a committee in Washington that put together a program called the Veterans Justice Outreach Specialist, which has a liaison assigned to every single medical hospital. We have 5 hospitals in Ohio, so we have 5 VJOs. Their whole job is to identify a veteran coming into the criminal justice system and hooking up with services. So I came back to Ohio 3 years ago, all excited about this program, and found out nobody's asking if they're a veteran. And you can't really say, are you a veteran? You have to ask, do you have military experience? Because many of them will not admit it. So in the 3 years since, we've had 3 statewide conferences with all of the leaders coming together, talking about what they're doing our vets. We have put together a Ohio risk assessment system that all judges are now going to be required to use. They have added a screen to that risk assessment that asks about military background. We're asking the pre-sentence investigation reports that every attorney or every probation officer does have that screen. We are pushing judges all over our state to start veterans courts. So if you want to know something you can do, you need to go to your local judge, particularly municipal. Start there first, because common pleas is a little harder with felonies, and say, do you have a veterans court? Because every time you start a veterans court, you can put that veteran in contact with VA resources. And those resources are just left on the table if you don't ask the question. So every one of you should go back to your home state or your home county, Push your local judge to start a veterans court. That veterans team brings everybody together, involves the VA. A veteran and a defendant veteran can get a physical exam. There is no regular defendant that can get a physical exam, but you hook them up with VA, they can get a physical exam and treat the whole person. So that's one of the big things you can do. The second thing is to be advocates. Write your paper, write your newspaper. I talked to one of the legislatures, and I said in the budget cycle a couple of ways back, why did mental health get cut and libraries didn't? He said, we got 10 letters from the mental health people, we got thousands of emails from library patrons. So if everyone in this room sent emails to push this issue, it would make a difference. We've just introduced a piece of legislation that requires every judge now to ask about military background when they sentence, regardless of all the risk assessments and everything. It requires them to ask that. Push your legislature to vote for that bill. So those are some things you can do in Ohio. I could talk at much greater length, but I don't want to take too much time. NAMI's heavily involved. Talk to NAMI about it. They sit on the task force. The Attorney General has a task force that's working on this. We have a Veterans Committee that's working on this. So there's lots we are doing, and I just wanted to encourage you to take advantage of what Ohio's progress is.
Fantastic. Could we put you on the federal Supreme Court, Justice? We need you. We need you. Thank you.
Mr. Kennedy, could you please say a little bit about your own success with the mental health care? And then also to the millions of us who live with treatment-resistant depression, can you please advise us maybe in that area?
Sure.
Thank you.
Well, we need to reform a lot of things, but including the way the Food and Drug Administration operates, because there is an importance to us reaching these cures sooner than later, because people's lives are being lost every day because of a lack of intervention for these very fatal illnesses. And you know, I recall in the 80s how there was something called AIDS. And all of a sudden, a politician couldn't go anywhere in this country without having a group called ACT UP in their face saying, do something, because the silence is killing us. And the FDA said, well, we need to check this, and we need to check that. And the AIDS community said, no, failure is not an option. We can't wait. We got to take over this process. Let us define the risk. Let us be in charge of what is working, so that ultimately it became a combination therapy. And that ultimately changed survival rates. Well, I'm saying the same when you look at the number of people that die every year of suicide. It's an epidemic. Silence is killing us. It's killing our family members. And we cannot wait. And part of our advocacy needs to be the FDA. We want you to mine your clinical trial data of all these pharmaceutical companies and find out what may not have worked in another area, but could work in this area. That may not have worked in some people, but did work in a few people. Because the future, my friends, is called personalized medicine. That's when they take your genetic profile. They know what works on you. And it may just so happen that Gloria and I, the medication that works for me also works for her. It may not. But we're going to know that now, because we now know the genomics, and we can marry it with experience. So we're going to have a much better way of being able to tell someone's medical history. That's going to give us the targets. Right now, we can't see the forest from the trees. We need to sharpen our focus and get the targets that are going to be critical to saving lives. I'll conclude. President Kennedy told the story of the French Marshal Léotet, who asked his gardener to go and plant a tree. And the gardener came back to him and said, well, that tree is not going to bloom for a long time. And you know what he was shocked to hear his boss tell him? His boss said, then plant it this afternoon. Plant it this afternoon. We need a sense of urgency. We all are sitting back because you know what? We've been beaten down for so long. The challenges are now. I encourage you to continue to stand up and fight because we need all of you in this fight. And you all are my heroes because I will tell you, but for the grace of God, I wouldn't be here today if it weren't for a mental health treatment and it weren't for the love of my family. And today I have a spouse and children that are my rescue plan that keep me in recovery. And I will tell you, for all of you, do not underestimate the value of telling your loved ones how much you love them, in spite of themselves. Because all of us need that unconditional love. And it isn't easy when you're dealing with a mental illness. It isn't easy when you're dealing with a mental illness. But the fact that you persevere is such a testament to your fortitude and to your heart and compassion. And at the end of our days, the only thing we could ever be asked to do is to be there for someone else. Because saving one life is like saving the world. Thank you very much. Thanks, Dad.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Congressman. Okay, let's see. We are going to be exiting the hall. And, you know, I want to give the congressman is leaving right now. So I'm going to ask everybody to sit for a minute and let him out the door. He has to be leaving to catch up. You want to do that?
Yeah, if they have.
Have you got the time?
It's just a few minutes, and it's.
Yeah, I love it. I saw it in New York.
Okay.
Yeah. Can we?
I was supposed to tell you about One Mind for Research, but we have General Corelli, former four-star general who led the effort in the Department of the Army, Pentagon, Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He's running our One Mind for Research. And because it's General Corelli, whether he walks in a Republican office or a Democratic office, everybody answers to him. That changes our efforts. And I think that with his leadership, we're going to be able to solve this in a military style, which is like, let's get the job done. And I hope in the years ahead you get to look at One Mind for Research and get to see it as a way for us to help not only our veterans, but to help all of each other, because it's all one.
I am delighted to be here, and I'm particularly delighted to be here on this occasion. We meet in an hour of change and challenge, in a decade of hope and fear, in an age of both knowledge and ignorance. The greater our knowledge increases, the greater our ignorance unfolds. This country of the United States was not built by those who waited and rested. This country was conquered by those who move forward, and so will space. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
50 years ago, John F. Kennedy posed a challenge to our country to be the first nation to put a man on the moon and return in the next decade. That was a heroic challenge for our country, and we came together as a nation and accomplished what people thought was impossible. We decided that we could propose a similar challenge, that we would be the first nation in the next 10 years to unlock the mysteries of the brain. Instead of going to outer space, we would go to inner space, the galaxy of neurons instead of the galaxy of stars.
I think we're really starting to uncover what people have really hidden behind closed doors, just how common these illnesses are, just how devastating they are, and how much of a toll they take on society. And we basically have no choice, but we've really got to pull together, collaborate, and work together to come up with the new treatments, to come up with the new cures, to help humanity.
We're at a moment of time in the effort for more funding for brain-related research. And the moment of time is not simply the burden of illness for all Americans, but most particularly for those set of Americans that can unify us along all party lines. Because when someone wears the uniform of our country, they don't say they're a Democrat or Republican, they say they're an American. So the effort to serve our veterans, saving them from being victim of the traumatic brain injury and post-traumatic stress that they suffered while serving us, should be what unites America behind the effort for research.
It's unacceptable that over 300,000 of our returning veterans have these illnesses. It's even more unacceptable that more of them are killing themselves due to depression and the effects of these disorders than are dying on the battlefield itself.
What we're learning about this war is that right now it's estimated that 1 in 3 are coming home with psychological or transitional problems, traumatic brain injury, and then of course those who have been physically wounded as well.
When they evac me and told me I was done, it was a huge loss on my part, because I left my squad, my guys in Iraq. I left them. I was an E6 staff sergeant in the infantry, and in the Army, that's where the rubber meets the road. So I was a squad leader with 3 combat tours, and it was a huge pill to swallow to start going in and seeing a mental health provider. I felt like I'd failed.
I think what the public doesn't understand is that as the war winds down and more come home, and in California, for example, we're expecting 30,000 a year over the next 3 or 4 years coming back to our state. And if you think 1 in 3 are having problems, we really are looking at a public health issue.
We have great expectations we're going to be able to do something, not in 20 years, not in 10 years, but in a few years. We've got scientific tools that we never had before. Brain imaging techniques that allow us to look inside the brain with clarity that we didn't have before.
We can find medicines that have transformational effects on mental illness, not just suppressing some of the symptoms, but really things that could possibly predict and prevent. So the opportunity finally to begin with imaging, with genetics, with stem cells, to get at what are the real causes of these disorders so that we could possibly begin to find real therapies that change the fate of these disorders and really have a true benefit to society.
My uncle believed that one person could make a difference and everybody should try. And that the spirit of his famous inaugural really elicited an aspirational desire for people to be part of something much bigger than themselves.
The energy, the faith, the devotion which we bring to this endeavor will light our country and all who serve it. And the glow from that fire can truly light the world. And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
All right. Okay, I'm going to ask everyone to leave the room now. So, yeah. So they can get set up for lunch. They're gonna clear the tables. Take any materials that you have if you want to keep the same seats and put them on your seats at the table so you'll be able to get the same place when you come back. While we're on this break, which will last for about 45 minutes, I think, while we're on this break, Please take a look at the vendors' tables, visit the vendors' tables. Also, during this time, you can take a look and meet some of the board members. They'll be out around here, as well as candidates for the board. So, ready?
Two. Without their support, this conference would not have been possible. I want to remind all NAMI Ohio members and guests that our annual meeting is a luncheon tomorrow here in this ballroom. Workshops and breakfasts will be downstairs in the Delaware rooms. Checkout tomorrow is promptly at 12 o'clock noon. Be sure to check out. The hotel will check your luggage so that you can stay through the luncheon. A few years ago, Charlie Alder, one of my best friends and Congressman Hackett's best friend down here, was one of the most vocal advocates for the mentally ill. He passed away, and his wife Phyllis Alder worked for hours creating a NAMI quilt. NAMI Ohio and our affiliates will be selling the raffle tickets, and money raised from this raffle will be used to support many of the projects that Charlie was very fond of. And it's outside in our area where the NAMI staffs. If you've been out front of the hotel, how many have seen the bus? Raise your hand if you've seen the bus. Matter of fact, Bob Spada tells me I can't call it a bus. It's an RV. You have seen NAMI's new awareness and anti-stigma campaign. This traveling billboard will reach every area of the state of Ohio and be available at county fairs, parades, NAMI walks, mental health levy campaigns, and we're going to meet with at no less than having 100 newspapers in Ohio. We're going to stop and ask the editor to do an article about stigma of the mentally ill. It will be parked with all kinds of information we'll be passing out wherever we go with the bus. This RV was paid for with private donations, and we thank everyone who made it possible. Now, how many of you text? Well, it just happens to be, if you would text NAMI Ohio, just NAMI Ohio, no blanks, and hit 80100, you will be donating $10 to keep this bus on the road. Now, I'm going to say that one more time. You text NAMI Ohio, 80100, and we immediately get $10 to keep that thing on the road. And it's on the back of the bus. If you forget the number, just go out and look at the bus, and it's on the back, because we're hoping people riding down the street says, oh boy, I'd like to support that. All they have to do is text. Before I begin my presentation, I'd like to make a special introduction. I'd like to take a moment to introduce a gentleman who is with us today. Mr. Mallett would you please stand up, Mr. Mallett? Ron Mallett contacted our office a few weeks ago, shortly after his son John was arrested for stabbing several people in downtown Columbus. John, who suffers from schizophrenia, was put on a bus a few months ago from Nashville, Tennessee to Columbus, Ohio. Rather than providing treatment he needed in Nashville, they opted for Greyhound therapy. Now it is our responsibility to ensure that he gets help. Mr. Mallett traveled to Ohio from New York, not only to advocate for his son, but to advocate on behalf of those victims who were unnecessarily harmed because John did not get the help he needed in Tennessee. Mr. Mallett, I am dedicating my presentation to you today and all the other mothers and fathers who stand by their loved ones during troubled times. God bless you. perception. As I enter my 40th year working in the mental health field, I am absolutely certain everyone, family members, consumers, legislators, people who work at the Department of Mental Health, all the local ADMH boards, the people who work there, our provider agencies, all want to do the best for Ohio citizens whose lives have been invaded by mental illness. The issue isn't caring. That is not the issue. The issue is perception. Those individuals with a mental health, with a mental illness perceive the world differently than their parents and those within the mental health system. Family members care about their loved ones and want what is in their best interest. They often can't find those services and blame the mental health system. People working within the system are confronted with more people than they can serve and less money each year to provide the care that they are able to provide. Because the system is 50 years old, the roots of the system have grown so deep and change has become more and more difficult. NAMI Ohio has argued the system is not meeting the needs of our loved ones. Many in the mental health system believe they are doing the best they can, but because this is NAMI's conference, and we feel we must say that the current system, as structured, has failed too many for too long. All of us, everybody in this room must be ashamed that the criminal justice has become the quasi-mental health system. Our loved ones were once locked in state institutions. Today they are locked in prisons and jails, homeless shelters, nursing homes. Many die too early in their lives because they do not receive the support they needed. And many are treated, 57% are treated by the families in this room without any help. We understand that there's not enough money. We understand that many of the services that are provided are not based on need, but because they are reimbursed by the federal government. We understand that in all likelihood there will not be much additional funding. All we ask, all the families and consumers of this state ask for, is that on a Sunday morning, that when a loved one needs care at 2 a.m. on the Sunday morning, it will be available anywhere in Ohio. All we want, all we ask for, is that when our loved one needs a psychiatric evaluation, it will be readily available. All we ask for is that everyone with a mental illness will have a roof over their head, food in their stomach, and maybe most importantly, someone who knows their name. We are asking that, all we're asking for is that when we need hospital care, we get it. And when we get it, the person stays long enough that they can come out of the hospital and make it in the community. That's all we're asking for. It is time to start a discussion that often is uncomfortable. But as long as people with mental illnesses are neglected, they are put themselves in harm's way. But as long as people with these illnesses are neglected, we have to do something. Again, as members of NAMI Ohio would be lost. I want every mental health professional to hear this statement right here. Members of NAMI Ohio be lost without the current lifeline provided by the mental health system. But that lifeline is frayed. For many, it is already broken. The lifeline has been thrown out for years, and our loved ones continue to try to swim to shore and never get there. A year ago, in October, I went to a funeral on a Sunday, and I had not met the father. I talked to him and I emailed because he was having difficulties. And I walked into the funeral home and obviously knew who the father was by the greeting line. I sat there. And I grabbed him, or he grabbed me. When I told him who I was, I said, "I'm Terry Russell from NAMI." He grabbed me, and a tear came down his eyes. He says, "I begged for help for 5 years and got nothing. I begged for help from my son for 5 years and got nothing. For the members here today who have lost loved ones due to their mental illness, NAMI Ohio gives you our word that we will never stop advocating for change that will save others from what you have gone through. When I think of that hug, that is my barometer. When I get criticized, and believe it or not, I get criticized once in a while for what I say. If it's the people out there who are criticizing me are not that father, I'm sorry, but my barometer is that father. I would ask, if you're willing, and it's up to you, if you've lost someone to a mental illness, please stand. I would like the audience to recognize those who keep us focused on the need for change. God bless all of you. The future, I thought Congressman Kennedy hit it right dead center. We look forward to working with our partners. Some people say I don't play very good in the sandbox. I want to play good in the sandbox. I really do. But we must find ways to do better than we've been doing. We must do things even with a grossly underfunded system. We must find ways to do things better. And that means using the money that we have better. That means change. We don't have the answers. Family members don't have it. We are begging the ADMH boards and the mental health agencies and the legislature, the Department of Mental Health, to come up with the changes that will ensure that when our loved ones are in harm's way, we have someone to hold our hand through that. It is now time for change. And I am so pleased. Look at this. Look at this. We have over 530 people here today. I have been blessed for 40 years to work in this field with so many great people. Joe Zoke's back here in the back. I was a board director a little longer than he was. I was the youngest board director ever in the state of Ohio. He always says he was. But the fact is, Joe Zoke, and I can go on and on and on. Mark Maley. Mark, stand up. Mark runs homes for the severely mental illness, 80 beds. He does God's work. Okay, enough about this. I'm going to start giving some awards out. Because we're going to give out 3 awards that are very, very special for people who have really changed the scope, and with more people doing what they do, we're going to do what Congressman Kennedy says. We're going to win in the next few years. We're going to win this battle. The 2012 Legislator of the Year, the Honorable David Burke of the Ohio Senate. Senator David Burke represents Ohio's 26th Senate District, which includes Union, Crawford, Logan, Marion, Sandusky, Wyandotte counties, and part of Sandusky, I can't say that word, and Ottawa counties, Seneca and Ottawa counties. Senator Burke has been at the forefront of the efforts to address the growing problem of prescription drug abuse in Ohio. He introduced the pill bill legislation that is already working to save many, many lives. His extended knowledge and experience regarding the healthcare industry led him to be named co-chair of the Senate Health, Human Services, and Aging Committee. He also serves on the Senate Agricultural Committee and the Highway and Transportation Committee. Senator Burke graduated from Ohio Northern University with a bachelor's degree in pharmacy and later obtained his MBA from Capital University. Since 1997, he and his wife have owned and operated Dames Pharmacy in Marysville, Ohio. They have 2 children, Alexandria and Adam. Senator Burke was nominated by Josie Setzler, Executive Director of NAMI, Seneca, Sandusky, Wyandotte counties. In her nomination letter to us, she said, Senator Burke has been instrumental in securing critical legislation to help ensure that those with severe mental illnesses have access to life-saving medications by eliminating some of the hoops that psychiatrists must jump through when writing prescriptions for individuals served by managed care companies. Passage of the psychiatric exemption was a huge win for mental health consumers and would not have been possible without the leadership of this senator. And by the way, Ohio is the only state to have psychiatric exemption legislation. Senator Burke, it is also very grateful to Senator Burke for the willingness to sponsor a bill on behalf of us that will provide clarity to Ohio's court-ordered outpatient treatment law. We salute Senator Burke for his support of recovery and improving health in our communities. Senator Burke, I'm going to give you the, can you come on up? Senator Burke, we'd like to honor you with a special award in recognition of your service. NAMI, Ohio will provide a luncheon for 10 of your constituencies whose life have been affected by mental illness. This luncheon will be provided in honor of your service at Doc Henderson's restaurant in Marysville, Ohio, which I hear is your favorite restaurant. We'd like to say a few words. Here you go.
Thank you very much. Terry, thank you very much. I echo your passion in this arena, and I applaud you for your leadership at the state level. You know, I accept this award. As you work on these issues, it's a team play. It's not just Senator Burke or any other individual per se. It's folks rallying around a battle cry of what I call a return to normal. The fact that we didn't have a psychiatric exemption, the fact that we are the only state in this country with a psychiatric exemption is appalling. I'm trying to get back to normal. And we have such a hole to dig our way out of. And I appreciate the help that NAMI gives me and gives our state in trying to get back to normal. Just briefly, my passion in this arena runs deep. And not necessarily from personal experience, but from that of others. And it goes back to a gentleman who's no longer with us, who is a psychiatrist, who I got to know very well, who treated folks back in the days of phenobarbital and tempered water baths. And he befriended his patients when you weren't supposed to befriend your patients, and grew clinical and personal relationships with patients that allowed these folks back into society, that built on trust, the way we do any disease state. And isn't that what we're really fighting for? I hope the Lord blesses me with more time in the Senate to work on these critical issues, but always remember, we're just getting started. I applaud all of you for the situations that you deal with, for the people that you help, but I can promise you in the Ohio Senate, I will continue to battle for the need just to get back to normal. Thank you.
See why we picked him? He's something. And by the way, I have a friend who I knew before he was a politician, and we played golf, and he acted out all the time. I had to settle him down. Then he gets elected to county commissioner. Then he becomes a state representative. Bobby Hack is down here. Bobby, stand up. Let's give Bobby Hack a head. Now, Bobby, when I want a piece of legislation, right? Okay. You know, after this morning's speech, I think this award is very, very appropriate. And that's NAMI Ohio's Veterans Appreciation Award, going to Walter Hudson. Walter Hudson's a veteran who has gone to extreme measures to be a voice of veterans struggling with mental health issues. He's developed a number of programs and is currently working to find employment for this special population. Why don't you come up here, Walter? Walter, in honor of your service to NAMI Ohio, will provide a luncheon for 10 of the individuals you choose for those that you've been working with. The luncheon will be provided in your name at a restaurant in your community of Wooster, Ohio. I like these awards. You know, instead of some kind of plaque you get, we're going to help some people.
My people are big eaters. Thank you so much, and this is not for me, but it's for an awful lot of people and people that you know. There are 890,300 veterans in Ohio. Think about that, 890,300 veterans in Ohio. That's what, 1 out of 8. And that's because we have a huge cohort that are the World War II veterans. And we've got another big cohort, the Korean veterans, and another cohort, the Vietnam veterans, and now we've got the Middle Eastern veterans. But every veteran kept us safe. Only a tiny, tiny fraction of the number of veterans actually see combat, and that's a good thing. It's because the rest of us were keeping our heads down and everybody getting the beans, bullets, and bandages up to the front where they were needed. Now, we need to get the beans, bullets, and bandages up to the front where they're needed for the veterans now. Terry said I only have a minute, so here's the minute. We're starting Vet to Vet Ohio. Now, how is Vet to Vet Ohio different than anything else? It's a peer-led, veteran-led wellness meetings in your community. We're starting in Northeast Ohio. We've got a chapter in Canton and Stark County. We've got a chapter at Parma. We're going to start a chapter in Worcester. We're going to start a chapter in Mansfield. We're going to start a chapter in Akron. We're going to start chapters all over Northeast Ohio. We're going to come to Columbus. Then we're going to go sweep down through Dayton and Chillicothe, Cincinnati, and then up through Northwest Ohio. Now, how's this going to be different? Well, what we're going to be doing is giving peer support of people with lived experience to people with lived experience. A guide on the side, a person in the know helping somebody else to be a person in the know. Now, how does this translate to money? Well, on July 1, 2013, what we do will be Medicaid billable as peer support services. So you can put $1 on it. Well, when somebody's trained as a Vet to Vet Ohio facilitator, they agree to give 12 hours a week in peer support to Ohio veterans and their family members. Our plan right now is to train 600 facilitators to do that in 300 co-facilitator teams by 2015. Now, giving that 12 hours billable at $40 an hour, that's $14,400,000 of peer support annually in Medicaid billable match equivalent that we can be providing to Ohio for free. Just give us the money to train the veterans as peer specialist facilitators, and we'll bring this to your community, and we'll generate $14,400,000 in Medicaid billable equivalent match that will make your community safer, better, and help people recover. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The most prestigious award NAMI Ohio gives is the Herb Reisenfeld Award. I'm going to call on Janet Pulser from NAMI, the NAMI board member from Athens County, Ohio, to present this award. Janet.
I'm quite honored to be here today. When Terry asked me to do this, I was almost tearful. However, I didn't know at the time that there would be IMAX screens on either side of me. My face. All right. Let me get started. My name's Janet Pulser. I reside in Athens, Ohio, and I'm a member of the NAMI Ohio Board of Directors, and I'm very proud to come before you today to present this most prestigious award, the Herb Reisenfeld Award, named after the grandfather of NAMI Ohio. You might as well sit down, Terry, because I'm going to talk a while. I'm just saying. I'm telling you.
Herb participated in the first meeting of family members to create NAMI Ohio. He served on the board of directors for well over 10 years. He was elected to the NAMI National Board of Directors in Washington, D.C. after giving a presentation where he ripped off his shirt and had a Superman costume on. Although I didn't know Herb, I've been told that he was extremely feisty, and like many of the fire-breathing mothers of NAMI, he was a fire-breathing father. 14 years ago, NAMI Ohio was experiencing the darkest moments of its existence due to lack of funds. Herb, who was a businessman in Cincinnati, presented 2 checks to the organization that allowed NAMI Ohio to continue and now grow into the largest state affiliate in the nation. Herb's biggest contribution, however, was his dedication to his son. At a NAMI National Convention, Herb met a psychiatrist that he felt was the best person to treat his son. During the next 15 years, Herb sent his boy to Arizona, Nevada, and Wyoming, each time to follow his special psychiatrist. Herb traveled every 2 months to visit his son and dedicated his life not only to his child, but to all other sons and daughters whose lives have been invaded by mental illness. Former recipients of the Herb Reisenfeld Award are Bernie and Ed Schell, Ed and Velma Beal, Eugene and Irene Brudno, former Director of Ohio Department of Mental Health Michael Hogan, Charlie Adler, and David and Ann Robinson, whom I believe are here today. Could you stand? And now it's my honor to introduce you to this year's recipient of the Herb Reisenfeld Award, Ann and Tom Walker. They are the heart of NAMI Athens. I think you'll be amazed at their dedication, generosity, advocacy, and vitality. They are the parents of 4 children. James, their youngest son, who is now 34, has schizoaffective disorder. Ann and Tom sought out NAMI soon after James was diagnosed at age 18. And then in time, they became staunch advocates. They served as co-presidents of NAMI Athens, and then each had a turn at the presidency. Both have served on the NAMI Ohio board, and Ann was the president of our local Adams board last year. Tom has been the Energizer Bunny for NAMI. He has conducted 107 interviews for his radio program Live from Studio B on all sorts of topics related to mental illness. All of these interviews can be accessed at our website, www.namiathens.org. You'll hear the likes of E. Fuller Torrey, Pete Early, is it Javier Amador? Javier Amador, and other experts on many aspects of brain disorder, major mental illnesses, cultural issues, and mental illness, housing, hospitalization, community resources, to name a few. He conceived of and organized a biennial recovery conference gathering experts from North America to come to Athens to speak to any interested persons about mental illness. Nursing students and others in the mental health profession received continuing education credits by attending this conference. Last year, in maybe 5 minutes, he organized a speaker series that has standing room only audiences every month since the series began. Not only have the speakers been wonderful, but NAMI Athens has also found itself in the community spotlight thanks to Tom's efforts. The Athens Lunatic Asylum, which is now known as the Ridges, has been a favorite project of Tom's. Since the community banded together to spruce up the cemeteries, Tom has glued headstones, maintained and improved the beautiful nature walk through the cemeteries, and launched the first of a yearly ceremony to honor those veterans buried at the Ridges on Memorial Day. One of Tom's passions is the crisis intervention training for police officers. Tom has gathered consumers and loved ones to provide testimony during the week-long CIT training. At Tom's urging, NAMI Athens offers scholarships to police departments so that they can send officers to the training. Although Tom is retired now, he was a professor of Latin American Studies at Ohio University. An expert on Nicaragua, Tom has traveled far and wide to lecture. And what does he do with his honoraria? He gives it to NAMI Athens. Tom told me once that he was accepted to Brown University as a Huck Finn scholar. I'm not exactly sure what qualifications he had, but I think one might be his ability to turn himself into a woodpecker and drill at the head of any person until they will do what he wants them to do. He is so persistent, it's amazing. He has hounded the great citizens of Athens and environs to sign up for Kroger cards so that NAMI Athens will get 5% of the money they spend on their grocery order. He emails these people every year to re-enroll multiple times. He is relentless. Is this man a saint? Well, not exactly. Allow me to illustrate. Our NAMI board is mostly composed of women over 50. My husband and Tom were the only men on the board a few years ago. The day of one particular board meeting, Tom and Greg had worked tirelessly to install a sparrowhawk nest box high above the trees at the ridges. During the board meeting that evening, Tom looked at my husband and said, "Greg, should we tell the ladies about our erection activities at the ridges today?" I asked Terry if it was okay if I told that story, and he said, "Yes, just speak loudly enough so that Tom can hear it." No, Tom is not a saint. The real saint is my dear and wonderful friend, Anne. Tom would be the first to admit that his wild and wonderful ideas would fall flat if it weren't for the beautiful balance that Anne gives him. She fleshes out the details, assists in every endeavor, and then invites everyone over for dinner. It's no wonder Tom refers to her as Lady Walker. She and I have taught family-to-family class maybe 10 times together. I'm the rigid one who times everything, keeps the discussion on track, and makes sure that the directions are clear. Anne is the person who wells up with tears when she hears people's stories. She's the one that the students flock to at the end of class to open their hearts and share their troubles. I was witness to Anne's can-do spirit when the fail-first medication issue reared its ugly head. Our office volunteer couldn't quite seem to find a way to contact the legislators in our area. Within 1 hour, Anne had our state senator and representative committed to attending a dinner to hear the plight of people with mental illness who were going to be forced to change medication if fail first passed. The implications of this foolish policy became crystal clear to those legislators at the dinner. But I must say that this couple has gone above and beyond even these great feats. They hire people with mental illness in need of money to come out to their farm to tend to the sheep or weed the garden or do other projects. My son has been the recipient of their largesse. Their dining room table seats 14. They often set up 2 other tables to feed the masses, I would guess at least once a month. I'm not kidding when I tell you that every Central and South American student in Ohio University knows the Walkers. They house them, they feed them, nurture them, and if necessary, support them. My husband calls these students the Walkeristas. James Walker will graduate from Ohio University this May with a degree in computer programming. I know. He has, I believe, chosen his parents well. We all know the scourge of mental illness is devastating indeed. Anne and Tom Walker have done more than their share to reduce the stigma of mental illness. Please join me in thanking them for their years of NAMI advocacy, education, and support.
This was a surprise, by the way. Tom and Ann Walker are being awarded NAMI Ohio's most prestigious award for their tireless commitment to the mission of NAMI Ohio and NAMI Athens County. The Walkers continue the tradition established by Mr. Reisenfeld by providing both financial support, but more importantly, a lifetime commitment to the citizens of the state struggling with mental illness. In recognition for your service, NAMI Ohio will provide a picnic in Athens on May 24th, 2012. The picnic will be for NAMI members, graduate of NAMI educational programs, participants of the gathering place, the drop-in center there, and all other supporters of NAMI Athens County. The picnic will be provided in honor of Tom and Ann Walker's services to the NAMI movement. Congratulations.
We had a board meeting at NAMI last night, and Greg said something about a surprise donor for our picnic, and now it's all come. Thank you very much, and I know that everyone out there is working just as hard as we are. Thank you.
Well, this was absolutely a complete surprise, and it's awfully nice, and Janet is wildly untruthful in a lot of things she said, but it's absolutely amazing. And I guess the thing that makes me most emotional is the mention of our son, who will graduate in computer science in a couple of months. He's been our inspiration.
We're going to get a picture of Tom and Ann, and it'll be in the Herb Street Hall of Fame in our reception area in Columbus with the other members. Congratulations to the two. Okay, what we're going to do now, and I got you 5 minutes early, is we're going to take a 15-minute break. Exactly 15 minutes. Our debate will start at 1:15, and I'd like everybody here, because this is really the heart of what we're here to, real business, is to talk about how the system works and what we can do to make it better. So we'll take about 15 minutes. 15 minutes. Thank you.